So we're going to go through sort of 4 things about writing definitions: the when, who, how, and what. Okay. So when, what's the timing for creating glossary definitions? This is an important thing. We used to have a T-shirt actually that said the best way to build a data dictionary is to not build a data dictionary. In this case, when we're saying data dictionary, we're talking about business glossary. That can be confusing. Often people refer to catalogs as data dictionaries too. And what we mean by that is that sitting around and writing hypothetical definitions, it's not a really good use of your time. It often isn't really creating definitional content that is necessarily needed, nor is it oftentimes creating definitional content that is accurate. Because if you're not really trying to write a report or answer a question about how many active students that you have, it's really hard to get the context right of a definition in a vacuum. So the best time to create a definition is when you need a definition to build something. So someone has asked for a report or whatever. Another good time to do it is if you've got something that you've already built and you want to document, but the definitions of the things in that report or in that extract are not documented, but you can sort of see what was done and extract from that or reverse engineer, like, well, what did, this report is counting this thing and how is it counting it? And that can become the starting of a definition. If you're trying to create a standard, that's another good thing. Now that might seem hypothetical, but the point being something that you're really trying to get everyone to agree on, it's important, or a measure or metric of a kind. Speaking of that, if you're defining like a key performance indicator is another reason. Another thing is if you need to engage a steward in approval. So if you're building a report or an extract or something and it seems like it's completely obvious, or like it may not be something that's necessary to put in the glossary, but if it's something that you feel like either needs to pull in the subject matter expert of a steward or falls into an area outside of your own, and you want to do that, then it makes sense to go to put it in a glossary so it can get approved and sort of certified. And really, this means like if you need to have sort of a certified definition, is a good reason to do. So those are good sort of starting points for how to do that. And again, it's not like I'm going to start alphabetically and come up with with things. So I really don't know how the Webster dictionary started, right? I don't know how that works, but it's always fun to know every year they come up with like, here are 10 new definitions that we've added to the dictionary, and they're always like topical, and newsworthy or contemporary. And I don't know if this is the exact parallel, but it's the sort of thing like they're adding definitions to the actual Webster's dictionary or whatever based on the need for this term or a term that's come up and should be canonized as an official definition. So you don't want to create things out of the blue. It's good to maybe create definitions while working on reports or report requests. If you've got sort of, maybe you're working on external reporting, and this is a higher education, like iPads or state reporting, you can create definitions there. A good reporting process will generate definitions. Another good way to do that is what I call part of another definition. So, and we talk a little bit about this in the content creation area, the what area of this discussion. But if I'm defining active student or full-time employee, in order to define full-time employee, and in my definition I say the full-time employee is an employee who is active, is an active employee in our organization and is working more than 32 hours a week or whatever the definition might be for that. In that definition, like, what does it mean to be working 32 hours a week, or what does it mean to be active status? And those things like active employee status or number of hours per week or pay, those things probably need additional definitions in order to really define this. And you can put that definition in the definition for full-time employee, the definition for active employee status, or the definition for number of hours worked per week. But that makes sense to sort of have that be links out to other definitions as well. And one thing that's cool from a how to do this or when to do this is that you can also use this to sort of create to-do items that I want to add another definition that's going to help to define this definition, and I'm going to put that out there. Well, you can come back and fill that in later, and you can find writing one definition ends up creating 12 new valuable entries to your glossary if you allow yourself to do that. And that's much better than creating a 3-page definition that has all that information, right? Because if someone just changes your policy on how many hours count towards full time, rather than changing the definition of full time, you could just change it, some other definition related to that. All right, so there's your when to do it. All right, who? So who are the contributors to definitions? So, the people who can assist, you have report writers, so people who are writing reports and maybe are either being asked to make a definition that doesn't exist, or they're going to be able to provide technical content and information to how a definition is going to be applied to one technical area. A requester might be the person asking for the report might be providing functional definitions of the clarifications of the thing they're asking for. The consumers might be able to provide feedback or comments, like I'm looking at this particular report and I don't understand what this thing means, and maybe it's not in the glossary, and they're going to add content on what that is and what it means to them, or request updates to that definition for more specificity because it doesn't make sense to them. People who are filling out external surveys or things that you're filling, so bringing in information from like the state reporting agency or whatever, or the moderator or a steward, a data steward who if a definition gets started, they either going to be asked to approve things or to edit and provide content. Right, so there's a bunch of people who can be involved in this process, and you can bring in any collaborators that you want, both from a functional and technical side. All right, so what's sort of the best practice methodologies for this workflow? I've already talked about this and kind of beat this dead horse a little bit, but we're a big fan of what we call the just-in-time data governance approach. So rather than kind of sitting around in a committee, to create a methodology such that if there is a data request that is asking questions where you don't have something in your glossary, that's going to lead to a new definition and a process, to start the workflow for that adding. If there's a question about something that's been written and that's not defined, that's another thing. Right? So there's lots of processes. The importance in the process is to involve the data steward in the business glossary. So having the ability to kind of attach a classification like a functional area or a domain or a technical data system attributes to things, so it gets routed to the appropriate steward to provide subject matter expertise as well as approving and rejecting. But they're not, really, you can just bring them in. One of my favorite sort of methodologies for this is that if I'm writing a report and that report includes a request for retention rate or something, and I don't know what that is, that rather than me sort of struggling to write a definition for that, I could just create a definition, and in that definition or in a comment on it, I can say, please help me fill this in. And then it would, with the right methodology or workflow like we have in the cookbook, it'll get routed to that steward or the set of stewards to provide that content and get back to me in a very timely fashion, so that I can then continue on building my report. Right? And it's not just someone who's waiting to vote down my incorrect definition. I'm able to sort of ask someone that process. Either having a workflow like that or some other way to contact the data stewards for that and have those interactive workflows. So you can think about this starting definitions that you're either starting from the bottom up, like you're starting from, building a report or an extract, like documenting a report or an extract that already exists and looking at the technical details and then kind of creating definitions for the things in it. Or from the top down, which is starting from functional requests. So someone who's saying, I need a report that counts X, Y, and Z, and then you build those requirements and then document sort of how you're going to pull it technically. So both of those ways are good ways to build a glossary from the bottom up to the top down. I mentioned sort of promoting a data model item. It's very similar. Maybe you don't have a report, but you're looking at your data warehouse and you see that someone has created a metric or a dimension or KPI or something you're documenting, and say, I think that this should be a business glossary term, and you can promote that. The important thing is that the business glossaries are an entry per functional definition, and that any technical details that you have, if you've got multiple technical definitions, that they're equivalent to that functional definition. All right, so the last thing we're going to do, and I think this may be what you all have been waiting for, is like the definition content. So first thing is that you want to have the names of the elements in your business glossary to be specific and unique. If there is different context, they should be included in the name. This is a point of much debate. I think we talked about this a lot in the collisions, but you don't want to have two entries in the definition for faculty where one of them is active faculty and the other one is any faculty that's ever been in your organization, regardless, right? So you should have an entry for active faculty and an entry for faculty, which is, and that way when people are asking for that information or putting it in a report or doing whatever, that they have to say which one of these are you looking for, right? So the context is very important and the specificity is very important. So specificity really says that the functional definitions need to be very clear, and enough that someone can go build technical information about it, and if there's criteria or restrictions and exceptions that have to be noted in both those areas. So if there's a scope or a, like this is, like I said, only active or whatever, that's important. It is common that technical definitions include details that are not stated in functional definitions, things that are like very specific to that data system, it's a join with this, or it has, this particular key table or whatever, that don't impact the functionality, but are specific to that. But you don't want to have something in your technical definition that has like additional scoping information that's not in your functional definition, right? So, my report actually is, restricting this to just students, where, in my technical definition, whereas the business definition doesn't do that. Like the business definition is, doesn't say anything about this is only for students. Well, then you've got a mismatch between those two things. So the name of the other thing around the name of your definition is that it should be a specific and common name for the element. Shouldn't have database names, right? And have to be unique across all systems. And specifically, like, it shouldn't just say start date. You should say something like term start date, right? The functional definition, as I just said, it should be a specific business definition of the element. Should not include database terminology. Should refer to other definitions where possible. I already talked about that. Use links or references to basic terms for more specific terms. So I talked about this. Active Student Programs is a student program. There's a link there. Our application has the ability to build those links. Include example values in your definition if it's important. So, academic level is a level of study, for example, undergraduate or graduate. You can use what we call quality attributes to define like the list of valid values, or whether it's required, or formatting types of things. I think that's important. Once you have a good textual functional definition associated to functional areas, and there can be more than one. So basically define what the ownership is. Oh, this definition belongs to HR, or belongs to payroll, or belongs to payroll and finance. Create synonyms or common names. So, two different definitions that are identical in definition, or a definition and another definition that share a common name, but the common name isn't necessarily specific enough. So just, that, like, we have a common name that is employee, but that might fall into part-time, full-time, all those kinds of things, but they cannot be commonly referred to as employee. But employee actually is different. A common name is different than a synonym. A common name is just, you might see it referred to it this way, but that's not specific enough. A synonym means that it is the exact same thing. You have your policy attributes, your classifications, privacy codes, tags, attachments. You can put all that stuff also on there to add more detail. Quality attributes I talked about. And then the last thing I'll say here about this is that to use documented context to avoid paralysis. So a lot of times people get really caught up in trying to agree on a single definition, but you don't have to agree on a single definition if you agree to live under different names with different documented contexts. And so the three main ones we look at is time context, agency or domain context, and scoping context. So time context is like, is this as of today or as of last week or whatever? Agency domain is like, is this our definition, or is it like the state of Maryland's definition, or the federal government's definition, or Joe's definition, or whatever? Scoping context is, we have a definition for birth date, but we also have a definition for employee birth date and student birth date, and those are different scopes, right? So they're not identical. So address is a good example. You can get really caught up in those. So you have a thing that's called address that is very vague. You probably shouldn't really define address. You can, but it's not incredibly useful. Address street is more specific. Like there's a piece of data that is the street, or line 1 street, maybe even, of your address. Current address street has more specific context. It's different than just address street. Current billing address street is even more specific. current federal tax residence address street is even more specific. So these are things that within your system, you might be pulling in very different ways, and it's important to have that kind of context. And so you might have a hard time agreeing on what the definition of address street is, but if you allow yourself to add that context, you're in much better shape. All right, so technical definitions, we go into much more detail here. Given that I've run out of time, I think we're going to leave this for another session, but this essentially is where you can put in the information about where the data, that matches that functional definition, where it lives per data system, either in a narrative fashion or with code or links or even sort of mapping diagrams as well.